Spring sunlight slanted through the tall windows of Lady Mortimer's Mayfair drawing-room, falling in bright ribbons across carpets woven with coils of faded gold. The air shimmered with perfume, gossip, and the brittle laughter of those who had never known a true heartbreak. Beneath the chandelier's restless glitter, Lady Eleanor Ashcombe stood as though carved from quiet resolve, her gloved hands resting gently at her front, her posture a study in composed endurance. No one noticed the faint tremor of her breath, or the way her eyes, soft, steady, too frequently underestimated, lingered on the door as though bracing for a chill that had not yet arrived. She had long been the woman whispered about, the gentle creature whose engagement had dissolved without scandal, leaving her unmarriageable in the eyes of a society that preferred its tragedies dramatic and its women blameless. The years had been polite but merciless, dressing her invisibility in compliments, calling her devoted to her father, comfortable in her independence, and the more cutting, usefully agreeable. Across the room, two matrons observed her with the fond indulgence one reserves for a distant relative's unremarkable accomplishments. "She does look well for her age," one murmured. "A pity, of course, but at least she has found peace." Eleanor heard them, as she always did, and offered a serene smile, one she had perfected until it felt like part of her anatomy. Yet beneath that quiet exterior lay the memory she had never permitted herself to disturb, a promise unkept, a departure unexplained, a tenderness shattered by silence. She had buried it so deeply that even she feared what might happen if it were ever unearthed. A sudden hush swept the room, as if an invisible wind had extinguished every whisper. Guests turned their heads instinctively toward the doorway, and Eleanor's world contracted to a single heartbeat. The Duke of Malmesbury had arrived, returned from the Peninsula Wars after nearly 3 years of absence. His presence filled the threshold with the same force that once filled her thoughts, broad-shouldered, dark-haired, marked now by the shadow of old battles. A thin scar traced the line of his jaw, making his once untouched countenance startlingly human. The room surged around him in admiration, ladies curtsying with eager precision, gentlemen offering firm handshakes. But the Duke, after nodding once to his hosts, lifted his gaze, and found her. It was not the glance of a man greeting a long-forgotten acquaintance. It was the glance of one struck by a memory he had tried and failed to suppress. Something tightened in his expression, a fleeting fracture beneath the veneer of indifference. Eleanor felt the echo of it, a tremor that traveled through her bones before she mastered herself once more. She dipped her head, the gesture polite, distant, impeccable. She knew what was required of her. He was a duke, and she a woman restored to polite obscurity. Their unspoken history must never surface. He crossed the room nonetheless, bound by a compulsion he could neither deny nor disguise. The murmurs stretched outward like ripples in a pond. When he stopped before her, he offered a bow that was precisely courteous enough to disguise the tumult beneath. "Lady Eleanor," he said quietly, the tone shaped by a voice that had once spoken her name as though it were a private vow. She curtsied with perfect composure. "Your Grace." Nothing more. Nothing less. Yet the air between them shifted, charged with the tension of a past that refused to stay buried. Ladies nearby exchanged looks sharp as pins. A viscountess leaned closer to her friend, whispering, "He greeted no one so warmly." Another added, "Perhaps absence rekindles what familiarity had dulled." Eleanor heard none of it. She merely felt the unsettling steadiness of his gaze, as though he were searching for something he feared he might never recover. The conversation resumed around them, brittle and bright, but the Duke remained close enough that she could not escape the awareness of him. When Lady Mortimer drifted toward them, flushed with mischief and delighted by the sudden electricity in her drawing-room, Eleanor braced herself. "My dear," the hostess sang, "word reaches us that you have admirers again. How delightful. Surely your father must be pleased." Eleanor stiffened imperceptibly. She had hoped, naively, that the matter might be overlooked. The Duke's brow furrowed. "Admirers?" he repeated too sharply. Lady Mortimer, sensing entertainment, continued with a flourish, "Indeed. We hear of letters. Quite devoted letters, too." A ripple of amused curiosity danced across the listeners' faces. Eleanor felt heat rise to her cheeks. She attempted to speak, but the Duke, driven by a force he clearly did not comprehend, took a step closer. "Since when?" he demanded, the words edged with a possessiveness he had no right to claim. "Have you had a suitor?" The room froze. Even the musicians faltered, their bows stuttering against strings. It was a question framed as entitlement, shaped by jealousy, and sharpened by the arrogance of a man unprepared to confront his own regret. Eleanor inhaled quietly, her heart thundering behind the fragile armor of her composure. She saw the expectant faces, the suppressed smiles, the gleam of scandal waiting to be born. The Duke's expression betrayed everything he tried to hide: astonishment, irritation, something perilously close to fear. For years she had carried the humiliation of his abrupt departure, the unanswered letters, the crushed future she never spoke of. Now, in this gilded room, fate had turned the mirror upon him. She lifted her chin with an elegance that was not defiance, but reclamation. "Since when?" she repeated softly, allowing the words to float like silk above the silence. Her eyes met his, steadier than she felt, braver than she believed herself to be. The Duke swallowed, shock flickering across his features as though he were bracing for a truth he had never imagined. The onlookers leaned in with breathless anticipation. Lady Mortimer's smile widened, sensing the birth of a story London would recount for weeks. Eleanor parted her lips, poised to shatter the illusion he had built around her all these years. And just as the Duke's guarded composure fractured completely, she offered the first syllable of her reply, a reply that would unravel the past, disturb the present, and force him to face the cost of everything he had left unsaid. Eleanor's reply floated into the charged stillness with the quiet force of a blade slipping beneath silk. "Since several years ago," she said, her voice even, her poise unshaken. A murmur rippled through the gathering like wind skimming a lake's surface. The Duke's posture tightened, though he fought to mask the sudden jolt of disbelief. His eyes narrowed slightly, an instinctive response as though someone had struck him unexpectedly. But Eleanor did not falter. She continued, her words shaped with the calm confidence of a woman reclaiming her narrative. "A gentleman of steady character has long sought my regard. Your inquiries arrive somewhat late, Your Grace." The room bloomed with astonishment. Fans fluttered. Gazes darted between them with unabashed delight in this unfolding drama. Lady Mortimer's smile widened, the hostess thrilled beyond measure, as though her drawing room had transformed from a polite gathering into the very heart of London's most riveting tale. Yet Eleanor, though composed, felt the faint trembling of her pulse beneath her gloves. She had spent years guarding her dignity like a fragile flame. Now she watched the Duke stand before her, undone by the revelation of another man's devotion. The Duke's jaw flexed. "Years?" he repeated, the single word steeped in something raw, injury, confusion, an emotion he lacked the language to conceal. Eleanor inclined her head ever so slightly. "Indeed." She did not elaborate, though the truth pressed at her. How long she had been quietly pursued, how long she had refused to entertain affection while still in the shadow of a man who had vanished without farewell. A baronet's wife leaned to her husband and whispered, "So she was not abandoned after all." How astonishing. Another added, "And by someone respectable enough to offer for her?" Remarkable. Their surprise carried no malice, only the collective realization that the quiet woman they had overlooked possessed, and perhaps had always possessed, a life beyond their assumptions. But the Duke heard only the echo of Eleanor's words in his mind. "A suitor. Years. Long sought her regard." The phrases struck him like musket fire, each one unraveling a certainty he had held unexamined. He took a breath, but it failed to steady him. "You might have mentioned such a correspondence," he managed, with the strained civility of a man attempting control. Eleanor met his gaze with polite detachment. "I had no cause to share it with you, Your Grace." It was a sentence that pierced cleaner than any accusation. No cause, because he had relinquished every right to her confidence the moment he left England without a word and allowed rumor to gnaw at her reputation unchecked. Lady Mortimer, buoyed by her own delight, clasped her hands together. "Why, Eleanor, you must allow us a glimpse of these cherished letters. A gentleman does not write faithfully for years without expressing some charming sentiment." Before Eleanor could stop her, the hostess gestured to a footman holding a reticule Eleanor had arrived with. "Do bring it here. I am certain our dear lady keeps her treasures near." Eleanor's heart thudded. "Lady Mortimer, truly that is not—" But the footman had already moved. In the shuffle of curious onlookers, the reticule slipped from his grip, its delicate clasp giving way. A handful of old letters, bound by a faded ribbon, spilled onto the polished floor like fallen petals. A collective gasp rose. The Duke stepped forward instinctively, but another hand, Lady Ellington's, reached one of the letters first. "How exquisite," she breathed, lifting it. "May we?" Her question was rhetorical. Before Eleanor could retrieve it, Lady Ellington unfolded the page, eyes dancing down the inked lines. "My esteemed Miss Ashcombe, your grace of character humbles me." She paused dramatically, her brow lifting. "Would that circumstance allowed my devotion to be spoken aloud? Oh, Oh, how wonderfully tender. Laughter, delighted and scandalous, twinkled through the room. Eleanor's breath caught, humiliation pressing warm against her cheeks. But the Duke moved then, swift, resolute, a storm barely kept at bay. He closed the distance in 2 strides and snatched the letter from Lady Ellington's hand, his grip trembling with a fury he disguised poorly. "This is not a parlor amusement," he said, voice low, clipped, dangerously controlled. The room fell silent again, startled by the unmistakable claim in his tone. Eleanor felt her heart twist at the sight. His hand gripping the letter too tightly, his breath unsteady, his expression fractured between anger and something far less nameable. He turned to her slowly, extending the letter. His fingers brushed hers, an old, familiar warmth that once promised the world. "It belongs to you," he said quietly. The simple act, returning her letter, carried the weight of everything lost between them. Eleanor accepted it, her fingers steady despite the tremor in her chest. For the briefest moment, their eyes locked, revealing the years of unspoken regret, futile pride, and longing that had hollowed them both. It was not love reborn, nor forgiveness offered. It was recognition, painful, necessary, undeniable. Around them, whispers reignited like embers catching flame. "Did you see how he looked at her? The Duke is quite undone. Perhaps this suitor will stir him into action. Oh, what poetry in their ruin." Eleanor gathered the letters swiftly, securing them once more with the faded ribbon. With each movement she reclaimed a piece of herself. She rose gracefully, offering Lady Mortimer a serene, unshaken smile. "If you will excuse me, I believe I require some air." But before she could take a step, a new voice entered the room, a calm, warm baritone that swept the attention of every nearby guest. "Lady Eleanor." The crowd shifted. A gentleman approached, refined, composed, carrying the unmistakable bearing of a man whose affections were constant, not theatrical. "I fear I am late. Your father asked that I escort you home this evening." The Duke stiffened, every muscle going taut. Eleanor froze, breath suspended. For this was the man whose letters she carried. The man who had pursued her with quiet devotion. The man the Duke had never expected to encounter face to face. And as the gentleman bowed before her, offering his arm, the Duke finally understood that her suitor was not a rumor, but a rival. Eleanor felt the room tilt ever so slightly as the gentleman bowed before her, his presence a quiet anchor amid the storm of whispers. Mr. Nathaniel Harcourt, son of a well-respected barrister, known for his measured temperament and unblemished reputation, possessed none of the Duke's imposing elegance, none of his battle-forged gravity. Nathaniel's strength lay instead in a steadfast gentleness that never announced itself, a sincerity so profound it made one's own heart slow to listen. Eleanor managed a composed smile, though her pulse beat like startled wings beneath her collarbone. She accepted his arm, the contact reassuring, familiar. But she could feel the Duke's gaze burning into her back, shock and disbelief radiating from him with the force of a struck bell. The 2 men exchanged polite bows, though their eyes, one simmering with jealousy, the other steady with purpose, revealed the truth. This was no casual acquaintance. It was the meeting of 2 worlds that had unknowingly circled the same star. "Lady Eleanor," Nathaniel said, his tone soft but firm, "your father was detained unexpectedly and asked that I see to your comfort." His voice, unhurried and warm, wrapped around her like a cloak. Eleanor nodded. "You are very kind, Mr. Harcourt." He smiled slightly. "It is hardly a burden." The Duke shifted, his boots scraping against the polished floor. The sound seemed almost violent in a room accustomed to subtlety. "Harcourt," he said with a curt inclination of his head. "Your Grace." Nathaniel offered nothing more, yet his calm civility struck the Duke as a silent challenge. Lady Mortimer fluttered forward, delighted beyond measure. "Why, this is perfectly splendid. Lady Eleanor escorted by a gentleman of such admirable standing. And such timing too." Eleanor suppressed the urge to close her eyes. The hostess meant no harm, but her enthusiasm threatened to ignite fresh scandal. Nathaniel, sensing her discomfort, gently guided her a step away from the crowd. "Would you care for a moment's reprieve?" he offered quietly. "You appear fatigued by the evening's excesses." Eleanor exhaled in gratitude. "Yes, a moment would be welcome." But the Duke moved with sudden purpose, intercepting them with a sharpness that startled even himself. "Lady Eleanor," he said, "might I speak with you privately?" Nathaniel's expression remained tranquil, though a flicker of protectiveness stirred in his gaze. "If Lady Eleanor wishes it." The Duke bristled. "This does not concern you, sir." "Everything concerning her concerns me," Nathaniel replied, polite yet unyielding. Eleanor felt tension coil between them like a drawn bowstring. She steadied herself. "I will speak with His Grace briefly," she said, her voice gentle but resolute. Nathaniel nodded, stepping back, not in defeat but in trust. Eleanor followed the Duke toward the tall French doors leading to the garden. As they passed through the threshold, cool night air wrapped around her, carrying the scent of damp earth and early spring blossoms. Lanterns hung like golden constellations overhead, casting wavering light across gravel paths and manicured hedges. The Duke stopped beneath an archway of budding wisteria, his shoulders rigid, his breath uneven. Eleanor held her hands clasped before her, waiting. He turned suddenly, words spilling before he could temper them. "Years, Eleanor? Years of letters? Years of another man seeking your affection, and you never thought to tell me?" She met his gaze without flinching. "You forfeited the right to such confidences when you left England without goodbye or explanation." The accusation, though spoken softly, struck him like a musket ball. He inhaled, troubled by the truth he could no longer evade. "I believed departure the only honorable course," he said. "I was not the man you deserved then." "And yet," she murmured, "you left me to bear society's scorn alone." The Duke's brow furrowed. "Eleanor, do you know what they called me?" she continued, her voice still calm. "A woman clinging to an understanding that no longer existed. A fool who misread a duke's intentions. A creature too plain to keep a man's interest. I carried that weight in silence because I refused to tarnish your name." His throat tightened. "I never meant for you to suffer." "Intention does not erase consequence," she replied. He faltered, searching her face as though hoping to find forgiveness written there. Instead, he found a woman reshaped by quiet endurance. A breeze lifted a strand of her dark hair, and he had the startling memory of brushing that same strand behind her ear years ago, when the future stretched before them like a promise. "The letters," he said slowly. "Did you welcome them?" Eleanor looked away, her gaze drifting toward the lanterns. "At first, no. I refused them." But he persisted with dignity, not demand. His words were never presumptuous, never seeking to replace what I had lost. In time, I found solace in the steadiness of his regard. The Duke felt jealousy coil in his gut like a living thing. "Do you care for him?" The question hung between them, trembling. Eleanor considered her answer. "I care for the respect he shows me," she said, "and the gentleness with which he has always approached my heart." The Duke's chest tightened painfully. "And for me?" he asked, barely above a whisper. Eleanor met his eyes she had once memorized with foolish devotion. "What remains between us," she said, "is not affection. It is ruin." His expression fractured. He stepped closer. "Ruin can be rebuilt." "Not all of it," she replied. He reached for her hand, stopping short before his fingers touched hers. "I never ceased thinking of you," he confessed. "Not once. Every night abroad, every moment I believed I would not return, your face came to me." Eleanor's breath caught, but she held her composure. "Yet you wrote nothing." Shame flickered across his features. "I believed my silence would spare you, my injuries, my uncertainties, my unworthiness." She shook her head. "You spared me nothing." Rain began to fall, soft at first, then steadier, the droplets tapping against the lanterns like tiny bells. Eleanor closed her eyes briefly, letting the coolness settle her. The Duke gazed at her with anguish. "Tell me plainly," he said. "If you care for this barrister's son, if he is the man you intend to marry, I will not stand in your way. But I beg you for clarity." Eleanor opened her eyes, her lashes jeweled with rain. "I care for his constancy," she said. "But constancy alone does not command the heart." Hope flickered across the Duke's face. "Then all is not lost." "Do not assume that," she cautioned. "Years of silence do not vanish because you now speak." He stepped closer, rain dripping from his dark hair, his voice raw. "Eleanor, tell me how I may atone." She felt something inside her tremble, a remnant of the love she once held, fragile and flickering. But she steadied herself. "I do not seek atonement," she said. "I seek truth." He nodded fervently. "Then let me give it." "Very well," she whispered. "But hear mine as well." A door opened behind them. "Lady Eleanor?" Nathaniel's voice carried through the rain, calm but concerned. She turned slightly. "Mr. Harcourt." The Duke stiffened, jaw tightening. Nathaniel approached, offering her a folded handkerchief. "You are chilled." She accepted it gratefully. "Thank you." Nathaniel then regarded the Duke with quiet clarity. "Her father awaits her. The hour grows late." The Duke stepped forward. Our conversation is not concluded. Nathaniel held Eleanor's gaze. It need not conclude swiftly. Only honestly. Eleanor felt the truth of his words settle like a lantern's glow. She looked between them, one man forged by regret, the other by unwavering patience. Her heart beat painfully, caught between past and possibility. "Gentlemen," she said softly, "there is something you both should know." Both men leaned in breathless. "I have not yet accepted any proposal." The Duke's eyes widened. Nathaniel's steadiness flickered. And the night, rain-swept and breathless, waited for her next word. The garden seemed to hold its breath as Eleanor's revelation settled into the air, each raindrop catching lantern light like a suspended tear. Nathaniel and the Duke stood on either side of her, the former composed in stillness, the latter taut with restless urgency. For a fleeting moment, Eleanor felt suspended between two versions of her fate, one quiet and enduring, the other wild with unresolved longing. But neither man spoke. The rain spoke for them, steady and insistent, as though urging a reckoning long overdue. Eleanor drew her shawl closer and inhaled deeply, aware that whatever she said next would define the course of 3 lives. "I have not accepted any man's proposal," she repeated softly, "because I will not allow obligation or history to dictate my choice." Her words rang with a strength that surprised even her, a strength born from years of silent endurance. The Duke's expression flickered with agony and hope, while Nathaniel inclined his head with gentle respect. "Then," Nathaniel said quietly, "you are free to decide what is best for your happiness. Nothing more will I ask of you tonight." His calm acceptance settled over her like a balm. He stepped back, offering her the safety of space, but the Duke moved forward almost instinctively, as though proximity alone might bridge the distance he had created. "Eleanor," he said, voice rough with emotion he scarcely knew how to wield, "I cannot stand idly by. Not now. Not when I understand fully what I once lost, what I may yet lose again." She met his gaze, which was dark with longing yet shadowed by remorse. "Your Grace," she murmured, "you must understand that the power you once held over my heart no longer binds me without question." He flinched at the title. "Do not call me that. Not when you once spoke my name as though it belonged to you." She looked away, rain slipping from her lashes. "Names do not hold what trust cannot." A gust of wind swept between them, carrying the distant hum of conversation from within the drawing room. Lanterns swayed, scattering trembling halos across their faces. It was Nathaniel who broke the silence, his voice steady, his presence as unwavering as the earth beneath them. "Lady Eleanor," he said, "Her Grace, your mother, entrusted me with a message earlier this evening. She asked that I remind you that the life you seek should not feel like a rescue but a partnership. She feared you have too often given more than you received." Eleanor's breath hitched. Her late mother's wisdom, delivered years after her passing, struck her with unexpected force. Nathaniel's sincerity, void of any demand, tightened a knot in her chest. The Duke exhaled sharply, as though confronting words he had spent years avoiding. "She deserves more than I once gave," he admitted. "I am not blind to that." Eleanor turned to him, her eyes searching. "Then tell me," she said softly, "what you offer now that you could not offer before." He hesitated, then stepped closer until the lantern light carved the anguish in his features with startling clarity. "The truth," he said. "All of it. No more unspoken fears or noble deceptions. I left because I believed I was broken beyond repair, unworthy of you. I thought absence would spare you the pain of tying your life to a man returned from war in spirit only. But I see now that silence is a far crueler wound than any burden shared." Eleanor's pulse throbbed at the hollow of her throat. "You chose for me," she whispered, "without ever allowing me to decide what burdens I was willing to bear." The Duke's breath caught. "Yes," he said, "and it is the greatest regret of my life." Rain streamed down his temples, mingling with the earnest tremor in his voice. "But if you will allow me, I will spend every day proving that I have returned not just whole, but devoted." She felt the past stir inside her, a memory of summer evenings, promises whispered beneath willow trees, the young man he once was before the world hardened him. But memories alone could not restore the trust time had eroded. Nathaniel stepped forward again, not to compete but to stand in truth. "Lady Eleanor," he said, "I cannot offer you poetry of regret, nor the tumult of old wounds. What I can offer is peace, respect. A partnership built not on what might have been, but what can be gently shaped." His voice was soft, but certainty anchored each word. "I care for you not because of a story we once shared, but because of the woman you have fought to become. Eleanor felt something within her loosen, a quiet part of her heart soothed by his steadiness. Yet, when she turned back toward the Duke, she saw something that pulled her breath sharply from her lungs. He had dropped to one knee. Not with theatrical flourish, but with the humility of a man stripped of pride, drenched in rain, and trembling with the weight of unspoken devotion. Gasps echoed faintly from the doorway where a few curious guests watched, scandal blooming on their tongues. But none of that mattered in the instant Eleanor met the Duke's unmasked gaze. "I am not asking for your acceptance tonight," he said. "I am asking only for the chance to be worthy of your forgiveness. I love you. I have loved you in ways I lacked the courage to name." The word struck her like a blow, beautiful, devastating, and undeservedly late. Nathaniel's expression did not darken with jealousy. Instead, he looked at Eleanor with deep, searching empathy, as though silently urging her to follow her heart, wherever it led. Eleanor's throat tightened. "Stand," she whispered, her voice wavering. "Please. This is not a scene for public display." The Duke rose slowly, rain plastering his hair to his forehead. "If you command it, I will obey," he said. "But know that my heart remains at your feet." She wrapped her arms around herself, chilled by the weight of two futures. The sky rumbled overhead, echoing the turmoil within her. "I must think," she murmured. "I must breathe. I must understand what remains of my heart." Nathaniel nodded with quiet dignity. "Take all the time you require. My regard does not falter with patience." The Duke's expression wavered between hope and dread, but he stepped back, granting her the space she needed. Eleanor turned toward the house, her steps slow, unsteady, as though each movement carried a lifetime's worth of decisions. The two men watched her in silence, one longing for redemption, the other offering steadfast devotion. Lanterns flickered above her, their glow reflecting the uncertainty in her gaze. The night pressed close, heavy with the scent of rain and the unspoken truth that her next choice could alter the course of every heart bound to hers. Just as she reached the threshold, her hand upon the door, a voice called softly from the shadows. "Lady Eleanor, before you choose, there is something you must know." She froze. It was her father. And the look on his face held a truth that could ruin everything she thought she understood. Eleanor turned slowly toward her father, the lantern glow from the doorway catching the troubled lines carved into his face. Rain glistened on his coat, and for one heart-stopping moment she feared he carried news of misfortune. A debt, an illness, some looming catastrophe that would force her hand in ways neither suitor intended. But when he spoke, his voice held neither dread nor command. It held something far more intimate, far more dangerous. "My dear," he murmured, "there is something you have long been denied the truth of. Something regarding the Duke's departure 3 years ago." Her breath stilled. Behind her, she heard the faint rustle of the Duke straightening, the soft intake of Nathaniel's steadying breath. Her father glanced between the two men, his gaze settling finally on Eleanor with the sorrowful resolve of someone who had held a secret too long. "He did not leave out of indifference," her father said, "nor from cowardice. It was I who urged him away." A stunned silence followed. Eleanor blinked. "You?" she whispered. Her father nodded, remorse shadowing every word. "He came to ask for your hand. He believed himself ready, determined. But I doubted the stability of his position. The war was escalating, the uncertainty too great. I feared you would find yourself widowed before the marriage bed grew cold. I told him you deserved peace, not the life of a soldier's bride." The Duke closed his eyes, pain flickering across his features. Eleanor felt her heart twist with disbelief. "You told me," her father continued, voice thickening, "that you would follow him anywhere. I believed your devotion too absolute to withstand the grief if he fell. So I appealed to his sense of honor. I urged him to spare you such a fate." Rain dripped from the eaves, each drop falling like a drumbeat of betrayal. The Duke's voice broke through the stillness, low and raw. "I should have disobeyed. I should have trusted your heart above any warning." Eleanor stared at him, breath trembling. "Why did you not tell me?" she whispered to her father. He swallowed. "Because when he left without a word, you suffered. And I feared if you knew of my interference, you would never forgive me." Eleanor took a step back, the gravel crunching beneath her slipper. The lantern light shimmered on her wet lashes as she struggled to anchor herself in the storm of revelation. Everything she had believed, her abandonment, her humiliation, the cold silence she had mistaken for indifference, now shifted like sand beneath her feet. Her pulse throbbed painfully. "You both made choices for me," she said softly, her voice sharp with wounded dignity. "Choices about my life, my love, my future, without granting me even a fragment of agency. Nathaniel, who had remained silent, stepped forward then, his expression earnest and unguarded. "Lady Eleanor," he said gently, "if I may, though this truth pains you, it reveals something essential. The Duke left because he believed it protected you. Your father acted from love, misguided though it was. But hear me clearly, I would never make such a choice in your stead. If you grant me your hand, it will be your decision alone, never one dictated by my fears." His words were steady as stone, offering the kind of partnership she had once dreamt possible, equal, respectful, free from secrecy. She looked into Nathaniel's eyes and saw the quiet, unwavering devotion he had given her for years without expectation. Then she turned to the Duke, whose eyes had never left her. "I left," he said, his voice breaking, "because I believed it spared you grief. And I stayed away because I feared you had already healed beyond the reach of my return. But I have loved you with every fractured piece of myself, Eleanor. I love you still." She felt something inside her shudder, a tidal pull of memory, longing, and the tenderness she had tried so fiercely to bury. "Your Grace," she whispered, "you hurt me. Deeply." "I know," he said. "And yet here I stand, willing to dismantle every wall my pride ever built, if only to earn the chance to rebuild what was broken." Behind them, the rain softened to a mist, lanterns casting trembling halos around the figures gathered beneath their glow. Eleanor closed her eyes, absorbing the depth of the moment, the ache of the past, the weight of her choices, the fragile promise of what lay ahead. When she opened them, she felt clarity unfurl like a dawn within her. She stepped forward, not toward Nathaniel but toward the Duke. Her father inhaled sharply. Nathaniel's shoulders tightened ever so slightly. The Duke stood utterly still, as though afraid she might vanish if he breathed too deeply. Eleanor reached out and took the Duke's hand. "Once," she said quietly, "I loved you without reservation. Then I learned the cost of such blind devotion. If I choose you now, it will not be because of our past, it will be because of the man you are in this moment, and the future you are willing to build without secrecy or sacrifice imposed upon me." He clasped her hand gently, reverently. "Then let me show you that future," he whispered. "Not in grand speeches or public vows, but in the constancy of the days ahead." Nathaniel exhaled, the sound heavy but noble. "Then I yield with respect," he said softly. "Your happiness is all I ever wished for. And if it is found in him, I shall not stand in its way." Eleanor's eyes glistened with gratitude as she looked toward the man who had offered her steadfast friendship when she needed it most. "Thank you," she said, her voice trembling, "for your kindness, for your patience, for seeing me when others would not." Nathaniel bowed his head. "It has been my honor." Her father stepped closer, remorse etched into every line of his face. "Can you forgive me?" he asked. She hesitated, then nodded slowly. "In time," she said. "But trust must be rebuilt." He accepted this with humbled grace. The Duke turned to Eleanor once more, rainlight shimmering across his features. "Eleanor," he murmured, "I will spend my life proving worthy of the second chance you grant me." She felt her heart expand, fragile yet soaring. "Then let us begin," she whispered. And in the rain-washed garden, beneath trembling lanterns and the silent witness of two men who had shaped her fate, the Duke bent his head and kissed her hand with reverence deeper than any vow. It was not a triumphant victory, nor a claim of possession, only a promise. A promise that the story between them, long fractured by silence, would now be rewritten with truth. And as the night settled around them, Eleanor felt, for the first time in years, that her heart was finally, her own to give.